Undoubtedly, I think, things have changed so much for us over the last few months. In our own particular context in which we live and work and recreate, things have changed in many ways beyond belief in the light of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I just want to take in these moments. Thank you for sticking with us, folks. It's been a tremendous morning. I want to take a few moments now just to kind of draw things together, hopefully, and kind of sum up and ask us a few questions to reflect on as we wind down our session today. And it's kind of around this theme that's up there, thinking about from knowledge to obedience, and actually asking, so what? What are we going to do with what we've discussed? What are we going to do with what we've heard this morning? So much has changed because of COVID-19. But still, through that, I've seen so many positive, encouraging signs as people have been released from what we've identified this morning can easily become the burden of resource-heavy Sunday by Sunday church. People have been released into some new creative methods of mission that crucially are informed by their immediate context. No one's written a course on how to do discipleship during COVID-19 lockdown yet. I'm sure one will come. But it's meant that we've been informed by our immediate context and not by a program, and also not by doing what we've always done. Now, in a sense, as Simon said earlier on in his session, I want to, in a way, deliberately over-egg this, perhaps be a little controversial, just to really help us stop and think about our understanding of discipleship this morning. So I want to introduce what I suppose, increasingly see as maybe one of the most important shifts that we have to make in our thinking on the whole realm of discipleship. And the shift is simply this. It's quite a clumsy strapline, but please stick with it if you can. It's a shift from knowledge-focused transfer of content to obedience-focused transformational experiences. I'll read that again. A shift from knowledge-focused transfer of content to obedience-focused transformational experiences. It was a guy called Ray Moran who wrote in his book, Spent Matches, that our Western traditions have polluted the stream of discipleship making. Knowledge has played a pivotal role in the economic development of the West, and as such, it has infiltrated modern Christianity to the point that most of our disciple-making activities consist of knowledge transfer rather than obedience teaching. So it's as if, Ray Moran goes on and says, it's as if we heard Jesus say, teach them all things, rather than teach them to obey all things. He says that in accordance with the Great Commission to go into all the world, our efforts should be aimed at designing learning experiences that equip people to obey all of Jesus' wisdom. A shift from knowledge-focused transfer of content to obedience-focused transformational experiences. We've touched upon this quite a bit this morning already. Maybe in our discipleship, we've tried to teach people into the kingdom, this nice linear approach to progress as our chosen subject travels along the discipleship conveyor belt until they become a fully fledged signed up church member, knowing how to behave and knowing what to believe. Now, I'm not sure about you, but my life and my discipleship journey has not looked much like that. And perhaps even less so in these different days. Perhaps we've assumed that just because people have knowledge of something, they will obey it. I think healthy eating is a fantastic example of this. We're bombarded in the press, aren't we, by the latest diet fad. We live in a world where we count our steps and we count our calories. We also live in a world where we have the most nutritional information at our fingertips, more than any generation has ever had. But if you're anything like me, you still quite like popping in via McDonald's for a Big Mac, fries, and full-fat Coke. Maybe we've assumed that just because people have knowledge of something, they will obey it. My dog, some of you saw my dog at the beginning of our session this morning. She knows all the commands. She knows when to sit and stay and lie down, but just because she knows those commands, does she obey them all the time? No. And I think, again, to be quite controversial, forgive me, but I think in some situations, we may have almost been using what we call discipleship almost as a form of control in our church contexts. I've talked, sadly, to quite a lot of people who've given up on church because they felt that they were being controlled, perhaps even manipulated by church structures. Surely, if that's the case, we need to look closely again at what we might call our discipleship. So I should suggest this morning, what I want to leave with you is a couple of challenges as we embrace this shift in our understanding of discipleship. The first is very much a challenge for us as individuals, and Alison has opened this up for us wonderfully, thinking about how we interact with our families and neighborhoods particularly. But the first challenge perhaps to us as individuals, you see, as I've explained, discipleship has been based so much upon transfer of knowledge. And again, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying we completely forget the gaining of knowledge. I'm not saying that we totally abandon our theology. But I am saying that as we seek to disciple those whom God brings into our lives, they need to see our lives lived in obedience. And that's a challenge. The challenge that we see in that transformational community, again, that we've mentioned this morning from Acts 2, that picture of the believers having everything in common. Is that what we see as we look at our own church communities? I recall a conversation with a friend in our local pub over a beer, and he asked me what this Christianity stuff was all about. And I then began to explain. And I thought this was a great opportunity for me because, you know, I've been to Bible college and I even did the evangelism training, and I could share the gospel. Maybe I could do the bridge to life illustration on the back of a beer mat for this guy. So off I went, transferring lots of knowledge to this chap, transferring bundles of lots of dearly held truths. His response, though, was fascinating. Okay, that's great for you, he said. That might be the truth for you, but it's not the truth for me. I shared a bunch of knowledge. I transferred what I dearly believed to be dearly held truth, but it meant nothing to him. In our culture today, where truth is seen as a relative concept, where there seems to be very little absolute truth in people's moral makeup, we maybe need to work even harder as individuals at living that lifestyle before others that reflect Jesus. His response to me sharing knowledge, okay, that's cool, might be the truth for you, but it's not the truth for me. And that's a challenge for us, I think. This guy I met with in the pub that night needed to see, needed to experience, needed to become part of a transformational experience, needed to see lives, my life, lived out in obedience to Christ. There's the challenge. And as Simon has said to us already, perhaps crucially, it was during that conversation, sat there that night in the pub, that discipleship began. And to be honest for us in these days, even if we are meeting together as church, inviting someone along to a socially distanced, masked, sanitized, non-singing worship service probably isn't the best context in which to continue the discipleship journey with a friend. So I really believe that in a prophetic sense, God is affording us many of these new opportunities to engage in discipleship these days, teaching others to obey all things, not just seeking to teach them a bunch of stuff. So the challenge as individuals, as we seek to embrace this shift from knowledge-focused transfer of content to obedience-focused transformational experience, is first of all for us a deeply personal one. Am I willing to live that life of obedience, listening to God as he prompts us to get alongside people in our own, perhaps very different contexts now? But a word of encouragement that I've heard this morning from many of us, perhaps we're doing so much more of this stuff than we actually thought we were, and maybe don't call it discipleship. Just hanging out, grabbing a coffee with a friend, going for a dog walk with a neighbor has been mentioned. There are massive opportunities in these days. And it was Cesar Kalinowski who has written on roadblocks to mission and discipleship. He mentions that it may appear to us that no one else in the church is into discipleship. He said it might be a language barrier. You might already be doing this, but not calling it discipleship. But he says this: you be the person. You make the small, intentional steps, modeling this lifestyle before others. Kalinowski goes on and says, are we willing to be part of forming new rhythms into our lives and family so that others can see and experience the kingdom of God in action? So the challenge is very much for us to embrace this shift simply from knowledge-focused transfer of content to obedience-focused transformational experience. So a couple of questions on the screen there that can be copied into chat for us now. We'll break out for 5 minutes or so. And if we can think about this change in our mindset, are there any contexts, question one, are there any contexts that we might already be discipling others when we don't even realize it? And number two, how might we better understand the role of discipleship in the light of that? So we'll break out for a few moments and then come back together as we wrap things up. We're gonna push on, folks. You've all been tremendous getting through this morning, which is really good. Thank you for that. I'm just going to share another slide and remind us as we kind of come to just wrap this up now. First thing to say is that Simon, Alison, and I are going to hang around. We're going to be aiming to be finished by 12:15. We're going to hang around for another quarter of an hour or so. If anybody wants to chat and have conversations, that's absolutely fine. Back to this sense of a shift from knowledge-focused transfer of content to obedience-focused transformational experiences. That being, first of all, a challenge to us as individuals, but I guess, and finally, it's a challenge to our church communities. You've maybe heard the story of a giant ship's engine that failed. The ship's owners tried one expert after another to come and fix this engine, but no one could work out what was wrong with it. They then brought in this elderly chap who'd been working in marine engines for years and years. And he had a great, massive, large bag of tools with him. When he arrived, he immediately went to work. He inspected the engine carefully, top to bottom. Two of the ship's owners were there who were looking over his shoulder, watching what he was up to, hoping he would know what to do. After looking things over, this chap reached into his bag and pulled out a small hammer. He gently tapped something, and instantly the engine was able to lurch into life. He put his hammer back in his bag. The engine was fixed. Brilliant. A week later, the owners of this ship received a bill from the old man for £10,000. They couldn't understand it. £10,000. He hardly did anything, they said. So they wrote to the old man and they said, look, what we would like is we would like an itemized bill. And the man sent them the bill back. And the itemized bill read this: tapping with a hammer, £2. Knowing where to tap, £9,998. Effort is important, but knowing where to make the effort makes all the difference. And I'm so encouraged this morning, having listened to some of your stories, that I see you making an effort to pray, making an effort to listen to what God is saying prophetically in your context, making an effort to be disciples, making disciples. But sadly, it bothers me a bit that maybe so many of us are putting our effort into teams of people with sanitizer and masks and 50-page risk assessments to get back to what we used to do. Or is God saying something different to his church in the UK right now? Are we going to put our effort into releasing disciples from our churches to make disciples in their own particular context? I'm hearing some of that from you this morning, which is brilliant. Effort is important, but knowing where to make that effort is important. And I think in the rural context, we have so many fantastic opportunities. Some friends of mine in Leicestershire began a garden church session last Sunday morning. And our own Alison, who's spoken to us this morning, Alison's church community seemed to me to just go for walks together, which is brilliant. Back to some of Kalinowski's roadblocks to discipleship, and I guess in many of our church contexts, this classic one rears its head. He writes that the people who work in churches are often too busy, that we don't have time for this. What are the one or two things that you could stop doing to begin making time to have with family and friends, etc.? I'm fortunate to be part of a learning community consisting of pioneers and leaders around the Scottish borders and North Northumberland here. And just a few weeks ago, we had another one of our Zoom get-togethers. We'd had 2 or 3 of those sessions over lockdown, which were tremendous. But this time, sadly, I sensed a troubling change. For a lot of the leaders who are involved in traditional denominational contexts, the overriding concern that was taking their heart and their headspace was the pressure to get back to church, the pressure from others to open the building, the pressure from church members to do what they'd always done before. Some of these leaders over the last few months had been able, maybe for the first time, to invest in creative missional opportunities in their own situations, and that had been liberating for them. Yet now the pressure was mounting for them to simply go back. I find that sad, and I see that as a massive challenge to each of us in our particular church communities. Again, as Simon said when we opened up this morning, we're not saying that we should completely give up on gathered church, but we need to be so careful when there may be other opportunities to find out where God is working in our own context and get alongside in our communities. Like that old man that fixed the ship's engine, effort is important, but knowing where to make that effort makes all the difference. So I close with a challenge in our discipleship journeys, a challenge for us on a personal level and a challenge in our wider communities. A challenge for us to make that shift from simply knowledge-focused transfer of content to obedience-focused experiences. And I'll leave these 2 questions up on the screen for a moment, not asking that we go into breakout rooms and think them through, but for us to reflect on personally as we close this morning. Where do we feel God is calling us to focus our efforts personally in discipleship making? And secondly, how is our own church context helping or hindering our ability to do that? Thank you so much for listening this morning. I don't know if Simon wants to come and share anything else, but that's effectively my session over for us with those challenges as we close today. Simon, have you any closing thoughts?
Well, just to thank everybody for being part of this time together online. I've really appreciated hearing and learning from those that I was privileged to be part of a breakout group on a couple of occasions, so thank you for that. And I hope you hear that our heart is, we want to see more disciples. We are desperate for Christianity to infect and go viral even quicker than COVID seems to be going around the world at the moment. That's what we'd love to see happen in Christianity. And we're just convinced that if we can get this discipleship thing figured, I have a sense that God's going to figure out and really demonstrate to us how church should be done. So I'm really optimistic for the future, hopeful for the future, but it is going to take some hard effort on our behalf. So thank you ever so much for your time. We're going to put our slides and our notes on the website, so we would encourage you, if you want to see that we will put them up as soon as we're able to. And I have put a link in to the video that a friend of mine had recorded about Christendom and post-Christendom, if you find that helpful. Thank you all. I want to encourage you and pray for you, if I may, to keep doing what you're doing where God is challenging you on making disciples. So let me say these words. Father God, thank you for my sisters and brothers who you have called where they are to be your disciple, who makes disciples, who makes disciples. Lord, I pray that you would empower them in their families, in their communities, in their church context. Will you give them supernatural vision? Will you give them the right words to say at the right moment? And would you fill their hearts with love for those around them? Open up opportunities in the coming days, weeks, and months ahead, so people don't point across and say, aren't they brilliant? Or don't point at the church and say, isn't that great? They point upwards and say, what a God. Well, that's our hope. That's our prayer. So go with us as we now continue our weekends and preparations for whatever the week lies ahead. Amen.